Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Daily Bolt with your host, Dr. Jeff Tilley. Today's topic: Isaias becomes a hurricane again just before landfall. And where is it going next? Sit back and relax and enjoy today's Daily Bolt. Okay, today's episode is maybe about a half hour later than I would normally be recording it, but it did allow me to pull up the latest radar image from the Wilmington, North Carolina radar, and that'll be a nice starting point for this podcast discussion. I've already posted the radar graphic from 8:42 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time from Wilmington, North Carolina, as well as the National Hurricane Center best track and track envelope projections for Isaias. And so I'm going to start basically right there with the radar graphic. And if you look south of where it says Myrtle Beach in white type, there's a little blob in green with a little bit of yellow that appears to be the approximate center of the hurricane at this particular time. It puts it roughly about 50 miles east-southeast of Myrtle Beach, actually more, I guess you could say, directly southeast of Myrtle Beach, and a little less than 60 miles south of the North-South Carolina border that you see there. You can see with a various color scheme there where you have greater reflectivity values. You're seeing a lot of thunderstorms, very heavy downpours, maybe some hail. The red boxes on the graphic indicate tornado warnings that have been issued, and this is something that occurs with many hurricanes, especially as they are coming on shore, is you get localized areas of greater rotation and you get at least some weak tornadoes. Occasionally, they're a little bit stronger than what we call the enhanced Fujita scale level 1, but many times they are level 1 or even just a little bit weaker and very short-lived, and that seems to be the case at this particular time. Also visible in the radar image, you can see the various bands of thunderstorms that are wrapping around the center over the Atlantic Ocean. There's not as much on the south and western side of the storm. Most of the activity that we're seeing is in the northern and eastern semicircles associated with this particular hurricane. So, why is it a hurricane at this point? Well, it's a hurricane because, as I had mentioned in last night's podcast, the direction of the vertical wind shear that I had talked about in previous podcasts was aligning itself more with the direction of the storm motion. The storm is basically moving to the north-northeast at this particular time, and it will continue a little bit more of a turn towards a little bit more of a northeasterly direction as we go through the next 2 days. But with the shear aligned in the direction of storm motion, that is less of a problem in terms of the storm being able to continue to develop new thunderstorms. And in this particular case, that's actually occurring out ahead of the main center, and it's still feeding the overall hurricane circulation. So the other thing that happened today is that this vertical shear actually reduced in intensity just a little bit. And that was enough to allow the storm to strengthen a little bit through the afternoon hours and into the early evening hours. And as of 8 o'clock, Isaias was reclassified as a nominal Category 1 hurricane with 75 mile per hour winds. Whether it is picking up any additional intensity as it's moving over the warm coastal waters approaching the North-South Carolina border, it's hard to say, but it wouldn't surprise me to see just a little bit more intensification as the system comes on shore. Probably will come on shore as a Category 1 hurricane. It's moving about 16 miles per hour, and so it's a reasonable bet that somewhere around midnight, maybe between midnight and 1 in the morning, it will come on shore, probably somewhere along the coast, close to the South North Carolina border, between Myrtle Beach and Wilmington, and then it will continue on across eastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia as we go through the day tomorrow, and beginning to accelerate in the afternoon, passing over Chesapeake Bay, most of New Jersey, giving New York City a fairly close pass to the west, and then moving into New England by very early Wednesday morning. Given much of the terrain it is expected to move over, once it passes New York City, gets progressively more rugged. Both the White and the Green Mountains in New England, as well as the mountainous terrain of Maine. It's expected to weaken to a tropical depression during the day on Wednesday as it continues through Maine and into New Brunswick and southern parts of Quebec. So it stays a tropical storm a very long time, according to the latest National Hurricane Center models. And why might this be? Normally, once a hurricane comes on shore, it tends to stay, and once it stays inland, it tends to weaken at a fairly steady rate. It does not normally stay as a strong tropical storm for very long, becomes a relatively weak tropical storm, but in this particular case, it looks like it will potentially stay a tropical storm for at least a good 36 hours after landfall, and especially the fact that it's only going to probably cross over water once more, and that's the Chesapeake Bay. The reason for that relates to what else is going on in the upper atmosphere. And I've talked in previous podcasts about this area of low pressure that has been approaching the eastern part of the U.S. Associated with that upper low pressure are several smaller waves that are going to be passing fairly close to the center of Isaias tomorrow, and adding a little bit of forcing to allow for air to continue rising, thunderstorms to keep forming, and to keep the circulation from deteriorating as fast as it normally might after coming inland. So this is going to be a little unusual of a case. Often when you have such interactions like this, the tropical system gets very quickly absorbed by the larger scale weather systems. In this particular case, that doesn't appear like it will happen, and Isaias will maintain some degree of identity all the way into Wednesday afternoon before really starting to fall apart, potentially holding together all the way into Thursday afternoon into the part of its track where it's entered Newfoundland and Labrador, actually, and the Labrador part of Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada. So it's just an odd alignment of the larger scale weather pattern with the tropical system that's going to allow it to maintain tropical storm strength and weaken relatively slowly. What does this mean? Given the circulation is still partly going to be over the coastal zones, there's going to still be a potential for storm surge, and over a large swath of the U.S. East Coast, all the way from the middle of the South Carolina coast through the entire area of North Carolina coastal zones and the Outer Banks, the Virginia Tidewater region, much of Chesapeake Bay, and including the Potomac Basin all the way up to Washington, D.C., along the Jersey coast, Long Island, New England coast, all the way up well into Maine. There is a potential for an enhanced storm surge as we go along. We'll have to see just how far west it goes once it gets gets past the Chesapeake Bay, and how big the circulation remains as to how much of a storm surge threat really exists north of Chesapeake Bay, Delaware Bay, and the New Jersey coast. That's something else to watch over the next few days. But for tonight, that's it for this edition of the Daily Bolt. I'm Dr. Jeff Tilley. I hope you enjoyed this edition of the podcast. Have a good night and stay safe.